Just kidding. Hi, I'm Lacey, and this is supposed to be my Girl Scout Gold Award. Actually, my Girl Scout Gold Award was due in 2016. It's now 2018, so obviously I didn't finish it. So this video is about adoption, and it's where I interview a bunch of adopted people from Asia, and I interview the parents and the adoptees about what it's like to be adopted and like questions that they get asked. Yeah, I hope you enjoy.
I always knew I was adopted because we would celebrate like my adoption day and I would get gifts.
When I was old enough to understand what adoption was.
Well, we always celebrate my adoption day, so I never thought of it. So, yeah.
I feel like I have always known, and that there was never like a moment when I realized this, and I think that not only have I known that I was adopted, but everyone around me knew that I was adopted as well, so.
I actually have no recollection of a specific time when my parents told me. It was more or less just that I was adopted and I've known my entire life.
When I was younger, my mom used to read me like books on adoption instead of like Goodnight Moon. She would read like an adoption book and stuff like that. And so I don't think there was ever a moment where I knew I was adopted. Like I think I always just knew.
I wouldn't really specifically like tell them, oh hey, I'm Teresa, I'm adopted. They would probably find out just like randomly. Also by being my parents are not Asian, so that's how they would find out.
Well, when I was younger, one of my friends didn't realize that I was adopted. She thought it was biologically related to my parents, so eventually I did tell her.
I think they found out on their own. Sometimes they ask. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm adopted from China, so yeah.
I don't really remember telling anyone I was adopted when I was like younger, but everyone in my middle school and my elementary school, they kind of like always knew. And I didn't really have to tell anyone that I was adopted until I got into high school, and then, because a lot of people didn't know me then.
I didn't bring it up myself. If they asked, I would tell them, only if it was like relevant. But other than that, I wouldn't like outrightly just say, oh, I'm adopted, by the way.
In elementary school, middle school, and high school, I think everyone already knew me, and like I had the same friend group, so they already all knew I was adopted since I was like younger. In college it was a little different. I didn't really tell anyone I was adopted unless it came up. And usually it came up when they asked me, oh, your last name's Piacentini. And I would say, yeah. And then they'd be like, oh, are you Italian? And I would say, yeah, I mean, I'm adopted, so my family's Italian, so yeah, I'm Italian.
So many, like the whole thing about, oh, do you ever want to meet your real parents? Do you ever want to go back to China? In elementary school, they would bring me stuff written in Chinese and be like, can you read this? And I'm like, no. And they're like, you're Chinese though, you should know how to read that. And I'm like, I don't.
They kind of asked me like, oh, do you remember anything? But obviously I was like a year old, so I don't. Would you want to know your biological parents and stuff like that?
Are you adopted? I say yes. What is it like? Cool. What age were you adopted? I'll tell them I was 3 when I came here.
Okay, so one of the most often asked questions about being adopted to me was, am I related biologically to my sister? And I would always say, no, but she's of course still my sister, and that doesn't really matter. And I also got asked, do I remember anything? And then I would always say no, like I was very young, only a few months old, I don't remember anything.
They ask me all the time, oh, are your sister and you related? Have you ever met your biological parents? Oh, where were you like when you were adopted? That type of stuff.
Some questions I did get asked were, oh, your mom's not Asian. Like that's how it segued into how I was adopted. Because people will usually ask me like, oh, like where's your dad? Or like is your dad Asian? My mom's a single mom when she got me from China, and so my situation's a little different only because like I don't really have a dad, so it's hard to explain that to people because like people like don't understand that because like I guess it's not a traditional way of like having a kid.
I think every adoption person has gotten that question asked before. It's because it's just a thing that always goes through your mind when you're adopted, because you're always curious about like what your life could have been before and who your parents were, like your birth parents.
I would say that yes, it'd be really cool if I could meet them. At the same time, I feel like maybe I shouldn't just because I don't know what place they're in right now. So.
Well, with my family, they asked me. I'm like, yeah, sure, I would like to know, but I'm pretty content.
Parents, and that was never really something I felt inclined to do or felt like I needed to do, so it really didn't interest me.
It doesn't bother me not knowing. If I had the chance to, I would, but I'm perfectly okay with not knowing who they are. I mean, I've lived 18 years without knowing, and I'm okay.
I've never really had an urge to go find them. Like if it happens, cool, like awesome. But if it doesn't, like I'm fine.
Yeah, I actually don't really like when they say real because I feel like real is offensive to my parents right now. I like to call them birth parents.
Well, it does make sense because they are my real parents, but I guess the correct term would be like biological parents.
Well, obviously I think that the parents that I live with are my real parents, and when people ask, do I want to see my real parents or go find them, I don't really say that I do because, first of all, they're not my real parents. Even though they are my biological parents, I have never felt the urge to go find them.
That didn't really affect me at all. I would tell, if anyone used that term, I would say, well, my real parents are my parents that I live with now. I don't find that they're any less real. They're just not biological. Except I don't think that makes them, any different.
My real parent is my mom. I don't really feel bad when people say it. Like, I guess I'll correct them, but I know that like people are like ill-informed about adoption and they don't really understand like the correct terminology, so it doesn't make me mad or anything about
it. It's pretty big in an aspect of like where I could be if I weren't in the U.S. Like, I'm in a great family and I go to a great church and I'm a Christian, so like everything's great in my life and I'm just so thankful and grateful for everything. Yeah. It's affected me for the good and the better because I could be with like some other family and they might not have treated me as well as I'm treated right now, and I'm just really blessed by that.
I would actually say it hasn't affected my life that much. I would say that my parents did a very good job at making me feel comfortable with who I am and that I don't feel weird or an outcast, and I feel like when people ask me questions they feel embarrassed or afraid that I feel uncomfortable, and I always reassure them that I'm not.
It's a large portion of my identity. I mean, it's a unique situation just because it's not super common. It was definitely celebrated within my family. So yeah, I'm happy, If I wasn't adopted, I don't know if I know actually my parents wouldn't treat me any differently. So in that respect, it really hasn't affected my life. But the fact that I am adopted yeah, it played an impact.
I think it affected my life a lot on how things could be, because I can't imagine myself in a different family, a different home, a different lifestyle. I could have been like plowing the fields in China right now, and that would be like crazy.
Yes, but not like a lot. Like a very little bit. I went to culture camp. We did taekwondo.
I used to go to culture camp when I was younger, and we would learn how to write Chinese characters and make food and learn about like the different folk tales and stuff and dress in the outfits. It gave me like a pretty good like insight of what it would be like to live in China, and it's kind of exciting because like, oh, it's like kind of fun. I think it's fun to learn stuff like that.
Culture camp I didn't learn a lot. I just knew it, one, in Chinese, and they eat Chinese food. Very different from American food, Chinese. So that was fun to learn.
Yes, I have learned actually a lot about my culture, and I'm very thankful that my parents cared to tell me and help me find out more about it. And I've gone to camps that help me get more immersed into my culture. So I learned about the language. Like, I took Chinese classes. Even though I wasn't that interested, my parents were fine with it. They didn't force me to do anything I didn't want to, but they helped me get in touch with other people who were adopted, so I would have, if I had any questions, I can ask them, or if I wanted to know more people like me, I would also be able to be in touch with them. Yeah, so.
Okay. Well, my adoption agency did have a lot of events that my family and I went to. I was involved in like an adoption camp where I met a lot of people who had the similar situation that I was in. I also went to a school to teach me how to speak Mandarin.
My mom made me go to Chinese school when I was younger. Then I got a 0 on a test. So then I quit, and I really liked culture camp because I was around like a bunch of people that already had the same situation as me. Like, we were all adopted from Asia, so we don't really get asked the same questions as peers would ask you when you went to this camp. So I think the camp was really important to do because you got to meet like a bunch of other people like you and like socialize and have fun.
Make them feel special and try to like celebrate their adoption day, because that's something special to me, because it makes me realize how grateful I am. And also get them gifts.
I would say not to rush into it if you're not totally sure. Like, I would suggest like maybe praying about it and asking for wisdom, maybe, you know, and not to push right into it and say, oh, I guess we should adopt.
Don't regret it, I hope. And it's an adventure.
I would tell people looking to adopt to make sure that the person or like the child that you adopt feels very comfortable with the situation and that they know about it. I would feel very upset if I found out later in my life that I was adopted. I think it really helped that my parents made me feel like it wasn't a big deal and that it wasn't something to be ashamed of or embarrassed of. And I think it's important to help your child if they want to look more into their culture and not just throw them into like a different lifestyle than they aren't used to. Especially if they're older, they probably would like to know that you care about what they like as well.
Definitely let them know that they're adopted. Make them aware that they are adopted, but at the same time, let them know that they're loved. Or make them aware of their culture. Like, bring them to events. Maybe for like, if they're adopted like me from Asia, bring them to Asian adoptee like events. Also, just celebrate the fact that they're adopted. Don't, you know, make it seem as if it's a negative thing.
So like, make your kid feel like special. I know, make them aware of their culture, definitely, because I'm really glad that I got the experience that I did to be like with my culture and like learn more about it.
I'd like to thank my parents for putting in like 2 years of waiting for me, and I saw all of the paperwork, and it's like binders and folders full of work and like a different language, and they don't know how to read Chinese, so it must have been hard for them, but they got me, and I was worth it. Okay.
I just want to say thank you to my parents for adopting me and bringing me to this awesome country and for giving me a great home, and to God for placing me in this place.
Thank you, Mom and Dad, for adopting me. Yay.
Johanna and I are so blessed for everything you've done for us. We love you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mom, for adopting me. I'm really, really blessed that you came into my life and you were the one that like picked me up when I'm down and all that stuff, and I answer all my questions even though I'm annoying a little bit. But thanks so much. I truly appreciate it. I don't think I would have been the person that I am now without you. So, thanks, Mom.
What led me to adopt? I knew it was time in my life to be a mom, and I just felt drawn to head to China to find my little girl. And I did have a little angel friend named Melanie, who was adopted by my good friend Eileen, and I was sitting at work one day saying, I'm so scared, I don't know, can I do this? Is it possible? And I looked up from my desk, and in my doorway was this little 2-3-year-old little Chinese girl with little yellow ribbons in her hair, smiling at me. And that was my sign. And that's how I knew.
I had 4 children, and we always wanted to adopt, even when the 4 kids were in the house, but we only had 1 bathroom and 3 bedrooms, so Bob's like, there's no room. But as the kids started going to college, Bob said we could be foster parents. And one day he went to work, and he's at Stony Brook, and he had this little foster baby he met when he was on one of the floors, and he was holding her, and he came home, he goes, we can't do it. He says, I fell in love with this little girl in like 5 minutes. He said, I can't ever give a child back. He goes, so we can adopt. And then we decided to go to Guatemala. And then, but every magazine and every newspaper article I read was talking about people who were going to China, moms who were going to China to find their daughters. And I said to Bob, that's it, we're meant to go to China. And that's how we started.
Well, I desperately wanted to be a mother. And it wasn't happening the way I thought it would. So my husband Peter went to a meeting of Hope Christian Center. It was a home for drug-abused youth, and the parents adopted a little girl from China. And he came home with a picture of the little girl, and he said, if you were at that meeting, you would have grabbed her and run out the door. And I really would have. But that's when we realized that we had been talking about adoption for 7 years. And it was like the brick that fell on top of our head. And we decided that we would start the process. And we did.
My husband and I really wanted to be parents. And like Joni, it wasn't happening in the path I thought we were taking. And we decided to adopt. We decided to adopt internationally. And the next question was, where would we go? And we started going to APC meetings, which were very helpful. And one night there was a little girl from China there. And she had just come home, and she was very sweet and very happy. And I thought, oh, that's a possibility. And then the real start of it was one night I was home, and I put on the news, and on Channel 7 they had a story on adoption from China, and there was 7 little girls sitting on the red couch. And I called my husband and I said, that's it, we're going to China. And he said, he doesn't like to fly, and he said, fly? We have to fly to China. You have to go and bring the baby home. I said, I know. And he said, I don't think I can fly. And I said, well, then I'll go alone. He goes, you're not going, you don't have to go to the mall alone. You're not going to go to China. And that was the start. I said, I saw those babies, and I knew that that's where we were supposed to go. And we did.
was a lot of paperwork. You think buying a car or a house is bad. It was reams and reams of paperwork that had to be translated into Chinese and notarized, certified, and authenticated.
Oh, wow. You're good, you remember
By
all
the
that.
county, the state, the federal government, and the Chinese government.
Right, so, but, and the wait was a year or so in my case, but, oh my gosh, it's so worth it. It didn't happen soon enough, you know, but it was meant to be.
Bethany's wait was 3.5 years. And because we had other kids, and then you went to the police station to be fingerprinted. So you'd be fingerprinted, and if the fingerprints weren't exactly right, they would not notice. Sometimes it was 3 months before you were notified. So every time we went as a family to be fingerprinted, 3 or 4 months later we'd get a letter saying we had to do it again and again and again. And so finally all the paperwork went to China in April of '98. And then it was just months because we had her in December. But up until then, it was over just about 3.5 years. Katie was only a year and Cammy was only a year, so it was much better then.
So we waited for Elizabeth for 22 very long months. And Johanna was about 15 months. But it was worth, I mean, once you get that picture and the notice that the baby is there for you, you just forget about all the wait. And I presume it's a lot like labor pains. You know, people wouldn't do it again if it was something that you couldn't, you know,
Forget about,
right. So it was absolutely worth the wait.
We waited 1.5 years for Melanie, and our government lost my fingerprints twice, so we had to go back, and that was very frustrating for me. And at one point in September, they had said, you'll have your baby for Christmas, and we didn't. And I had a hard time with that. You know, we're not having Christmas, which we wound up having Christmas, of course, but I look back now and say that if they hadn't lost my fingerprints, I wouldn't have had my daughter because she was waiting for me. Teresa, it took about 1 year. It was the same paperwork you do again, but you kind of felt, even though you kind of blocked it out from the first time, you kind of felt like you had a little handle on it, but worth the wait. It's the biggest blessing I'll ever have in my whole life. My kids, we talked about adoption right away. Adoption was a very positive word. They knew they were adopted. I told them they were adopted from the time I met them. And we were very blessed to meet people who had also adopted children. And it's a very positive thing. Even now it is. It's a very positive thing. And I remember when they first handed me my daughter, and we were in a room, I'm sure, at the hotel, in a big conference room, and there were 12 babies, and there was one little girl who was 3, and she was very upset, and she was crying, and all the babies started crying. And this is a memory I'll always have, that I held her, and she started crying, and I patted her and said, "Don't worry, Mommy's here." And in that second, after I held her, I was Mommy.
My girls and my husband and I had this conversation before we came over here. The whole thing about talking about adoption, when we were younger, you didn't talk about if you were adopted or if you knew anyone who was adopted. It was almost like you didn't talk about it. It was a big secret. But really what it is a big blessing. It's something just so wonderful. And we had a little discussion about this too. I don't want to say we love our children more because they're adopted, but I think just going through the whole process, when you get pregnant, you're pregnant and then you have the baby. And we had to have our fingerprints taken several times and fill out papers. And Peter, it's a wonderful word. It's just something that means that your family is blessed. And I also remember one of Joanna's friends saying this perfectly. When I first met her, she asked me if Johanna told me she was adopted, and I said, no, I didn't know that, and that's so wonderful. And she said, yes, because my parents tell me that I'm even more special because I'm adopted. And that's just the way I think about it, and we always talked about it. It wasn't, you know, anything different. It was just part of their lives and ours.
We talked about it from the minute we got the girls, and it was always just a natural thing. And we had biological children, and they would talk about it with the girls, so it was very natural, and they knew they were adopted and loved from the moment they were handed to us.
People sometimes say, uninformed things about, adoption, and a lot of it they're just not aware of, what might be involved or why, and you have to follow your heart and what you know is right for you. And the struggles with paperwork, as we talked about, it was, it's just something you have to do to get to your goal. And it's almost, the way I looked at it was like every piece of paper I filled out was one less I had to do. You had to just look at it a step at a time. Because when I was adopting as a single parent, it was, scary, because I'm like, what if I get sick? What if this happened? And all these things I was worried about, but I finally just, had the courage to do it. And what I've found over the years is that, God and circumstance have brought things and wonderful people into my life that have made it all possible that I didn't know at the time, so you kind of have to put a little faith in it too.
And for us, our struggles, as far as other people, were more because we were older, because we had 4 grown children already, and no one could understand why we would want to do that again. And so that was difficult because we had a lot of people who walked away from us, and they just didn't, it was different. It was something different, and I guess in our society that is frowned upon, but it didn't deter us at all. I didn't know anyone who had adopted. Really, I didn't when we started our adoption. If I did, it was, through word of mouth from somebody else. And now I know so many people. So I think of all these people that God has just brought into our life, and it's just such a natural thing for us. And we don't think, twice about our ages or anything, because we just have fun. We love it.
Well, one thing that comes to mind is my husband's parents, mostly his father, just didn't understand, because years ago, like I said, if you did adopt, you didn't talk about it, and it just wasn't something that was necessarily positive in many people's minds. So I just remember that they had a conversation, his parents lived in Florida, and he was talking on the phone with his father, and his father just said some really horrible things, and it came out, transpired over the phone. And I remember that I wrote a letter, and I couldn't even tell you now what the letter said, but if you know that what it is to speak from your heart, how the words just flow. It was a very long letter, and sometimes I wish I kept a copy, but I know I wasn't meant to keep a copy, but it really got my point across. And one thing I do remember saying is that when she's placed in your arms, his arms, you are going to fall in love with her. And he did in a way like no one else did, a very special bond. So that was a struggle, but again, all just part of life.
Girls, when they were babies, inevitably, if you went to Target, somebody would stop you and ask about it. And they may ask some questions that, as Linda said, were a little bit ignorant, but not negative necessarily. And I started reading, and they said that, and I would tell them everything because I was so happy. I would give them every little detail. And then I read that as they get older, it's their story, and it really wasn't my place to share my daughter's story, and it would be at some point up to them. So the next time I was in Target and somebody came up and started asking me about my daughter, and I said, well, why do you ask? And the woman started crying and said, because my sister wants to adopt so badly, and she's had so many heartaches. So after that I said, well, this is not how I'm supposed to handle it. So whenever anybody asked after that, I was very forthcoming with all my feelings, and totally pushing it and being in favor of it, because it's the greatest thing ever.
Well, I do want to say one thing, because people have said asked me questions over the years and have been a little unsure about it. And I always say, if you think that adopting is any different than birthing a child, then don't do it. If you think it's second best, then don't do it, because it's not.
Yeah, and I've always felt more privileged somehow that I've adopted Lucy because it's almost like you say, if you get pregnant, and that's wonderful, but it's almost like this is something you had to take so much more effort for, that I just felt privileged, if you will, that I was able to have my daughter.
To think that God trusted us with a child that needed a mom, or and He trusted us to raise these girls. That's and I wanted to adopt when my other children were younger. I really wanted to adopt, and Bob kept saying it's not the right time, it's not the right time. And now I'm so thankful that we waited, because I finally ended up with the girls that I was supposed to have.
Right. I would say be patient and be willing to go off the, be willing to know that things will happen that you didn't anticipate happening, such as the fingerprints or the things we've already discussed. And know that when that baby or that older child, we didn't even discuss, older children, is placed in your arms, there will be in your life no greater feeling of joy that you'll have at that moment. But it's a long haul, and it's worth every minute, but you have to be patient and know that God has the right child for you, and that child will come when it's time.
And I had been married years before I had adopted Lucy, and never, had a child that way at the time. It was, something, we're trying for, whatever. And now, years later, I look back, and you ever hear that song, Thank God for Unanswered Prayers? Because I realized that Lucy was the child I was supposed to have.
Exactly.
And that was the path for me to get.